live at the 2022 NACDA Convention in Las Vegas. This is From the Chair. Here is your host, Mike Hamilton.
Welcome into this episode of From the Chair. I'm Mike Hamilton, your host, and got a real special series coming up for you over the next several weeks. We're actually recording live here at the Mandalay Bay at NACDA's 2022 convention in Las Vegas. We're using this as a chance to visit in person with some athletic directors, and so over the next 7 or 8 weeks, you'll see some of our conversations, and I think you'll enjoy it. And today, our first guest is Dr. Derrick Gragg from Northwestern University. Derrick and I have known each other for a long time, so looking forward to this conversation we've got in front of us. Thanks for joining me, Derrick.
Absolutely, it's good to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Always a pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely.
You know, I told you we wanted to talk a little bit right out of the gate. You know, life stories inform where we end up, right? And I find it interesting that you're at an elite private institution, and you actually started, I'll call it your career in athletics, at an elite academic institution as a student athlete at Vanderbilt coming out of Huntsville, Alabama. I'm interested in how you decided on Vanderbilt particularly, and maybe tell us a little bit about that transition from high school in Huntsville on the campus in Nashville.
Absolutely, and growing up in Alabama, everybody knows football basically is king. So just growing up playing football, basketball, baseball all year round, basically, that's what we did. But my mom was really instrumental in me going to Vanderbilt. My mom retired as a long-time educator in the state of Alabama. And so she actually, back in 1965, she helped integrate a high school in Huntsville, where we're from, racially with a handful of other black students. Wow. And what's interesting about her, when she retired from the public school system there, she retired as the lead counselor for the school she helped integrate all those years back. So my mom was strategic. It's interesting now that I'm a parent, because I was highly recruited. It's hard to believe I was really, really good back then, like 35 years ago. So I was one of the top 20 players in Alabama. And so, you know, you usually don't let those types of players get out of state. Yeah. But my mom was strategic. She sent me on visits for my official visits. But when we went to Vanderbilt, she took me up there. And so I didn't know the difference. But when Watson Brown is who recruited me, okay. And then my last year I ended up playing for Jerry DiNardo, who was very influential in my life too. But when Watson offered me the scholarship, my mom's sitting there, and I just looked at her, and all she did was nod. Yeah. And when she nodded, I said, well, yes, sir, I'm coming. And, you know, it turned out to be the best choice out of all those schools I was recruited by far, just because of the educational component, obviously, the blend of big-time athletics and high academics, just like you mentioned, like what I'm doing now. So it's where I got my start and just met some of the greatest guys in the world that I ended up, we're still great friends now. Some guys who are very influential across the country and the things that they do there at the top of their fields. But that's where it all started. And it occurred to me, I just spoke to the NAD group. When I went to Vanderbilt in 1988, I have literally been on a campus almost every day of my life since that time. Yeah. Since 1988, all the way through grad school, and then back to Vanderbilt to start my career. So it all kind of started right there at Vandy, and also started my career there.
So you wrote a book about your time there, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I've not had a chance to read the book yet. Did you write that book later in life as you were pursuing your PhD, or after you? Tell me a little bit about that book.
Yes, and it took me forever to do it, because I was always in school, and I was moving around a lot, but I always continued to transfer credits and go to different grad schools, and finally finished my doctorate at Arkansas. And so it was after my dissertation. It wasn't until I think I was the AD at Tulsa by the time it came out. So 2015. So it took me about 5 years to write it. And it's called 40, oh gosh, I'm blanking on you guys will edit that, won't you?
No, it's all good. It's about you 10 folks that you were classmates with, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 40 Days of Direction.
Yes. Life
Lessons from the Talented 10. And so, just again, a really extraordinary group of guys. And a lot of us, we're the same. We came from the same backgrounds, but from all over the country. You have to recruit nationally at Vanderbilt. But the one thing, and our teams weren't very successful. When Jerry DiNardo came in, though, we almost went to a bowl game our last year. He ended up SEC Coach of the Year, and he had just a different mantra, W-I-N, win, what's important now, and really instilled that, and did very well at Vanderbilt, went on to LSU. But those guys rose through the ranks of their professions, and I always talk to people about this, especially young people. I just talked to the NAD group about it, in paying your dues and embracing your process. And I won't say today's generation, but today's society there's so many overnight sensations, so many people looking for the viral moment, but these guys really put in a lot of work, paid their dues, and right now are at the top of their professions. And I could just go on and on. One of them is a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army, William Brown, great. Clarence Civilian was the youngest at the time, one of the youngest black administrators that oversaw a hospital at the time. Derrick Payne, he now owns 2 dental firms. Dr. Derrick Payne in Memphis, Tennessee, where he came from, comes out of Orange Mound. Corey Harris played 12 years in the NFL, 6 different teams, got an NFL championship ring with Baltimore back in 2001, I think it was. And so just extraordinary guys. And so for me, coming up in a group like that, it was you almost had no choice but to try to excel and be on that level too. And again, we all met there at Vanderbilt.
And of course, there's Dr. Derrick Gragg too. So out of that whole group, right?
Yeah.
So, staying on the theme for just a minute of the PhD, the doctorate for a moment, these jobs are hard. They're time consuming. To find a slot to do anything is complex, right? But you made the decision to pursue your doctorate. And I'm assuming part of that was, you've already alluded to your mom's influence on your life. You care about academic measures. You see yourself as an educator. Was that the genesis of the decision to pursue
Absolutely,
doctorate?
you're spot on with that. My mom has 3 master's degrees. Grew up in a family, and her parents didn't go to college, but both her parents had siblings that graduated from college.
Okay.
So I'm actually 3rd generation college. So it's just expected in my family. And so it was always a great pursuit of mine, but I tell young people too, and I was so young, and you and I go way back. I think we went to the first division. It was the D1A. What was it then?
I think it was called the Development Institute.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah.
I think we were there in 2001 or 2. But I always talked about being young and always the youngest person in the room. So I felt like I needed to at least have the same academic credentials that a lot of people had. And so now I'm obviously not the young guy in the room anymore. But I think especially in higher education, it's allowed me to do a lot of things. And I've also taught about a dozen courses at the different schools where I've worked. So I finished my master's at Wayne State. This was even before, and I was working at Michigan even before I went to Arkansas. And I started teaching classes that I had graduated from. That's how I got my start in teaching. And actually, I just taught a class at Northwestern called The Business of College Athletics. And so it was taxing and time consuming, but my staff did a great job of coming in, had a lot of great speakers come in from the staff talking about everything that we do A to Z. So I've always prided myself on being more than just an athletic director. I want to do other things, want to integrate into mainstream campus society, want to make relationships with the faculty and everybody else, and just let people know that I'm open to doing that.
That's tremendous. So there are a couple different paths that you find athletic directors coming from. One is what we call the internal path, one's external. There's also the notion of some folks stay a long time at one place, some folks work at multiple places. I would say your track, at least initially, has been characterized by, I think you started in compliance, if I remember correctly, on the internal side of the business. And you've worked at a number of great places. I mean, you've been at Mizzou, you've been at Michigan, you've been at Eastern Michigan, Tulsa, Northwestern, Arkansas. I may have left somewhere out in there. But your perspective on the benefit of both questions here, your history on the internal side of the business, but also the advantages of having been at multiple institutions and having learned from those different spots.
It's just been a great experience. And starting out in the business, I actually thought I wanted to coach. So I wanted to get my foot in the door. So I got to go back to Vanderbilt, started in the SEC, did 2 years there, went to University of Missouri, and a lot of people don't know that Joe Castiglione was the AD there then. You would know that, but
I think I actually was a candidate for a job while you were there.
Oh, wow,
if I remember correctly, in the 90s.
Yeah, Joe was a great mentor of mine. I actually replaced Damon Evans was the compliance director there. He went back to the SEC office.
Right.
And I replaced him there, but Joe was probably the youngest AD in the country at the time, but he's always been a great mentor for me. So then we went from the Big 8 to the Big 12. Steve Hatchell was the commissioner, and then I got the job at Michigan, got to go to the Big 10. So it just kept going on, and then after Michigan, I went back to the SEC at Arkansas, which you mentioned.
Right.
Worked for...
Did Coach Broyles hire you there?
I was about to say, worked for the late, great Frank Broyles.
Yeah.
Learned a lot from him, and the funny thing about Coach was he was 76 when I got the job, so he had already been there and done that. So a lot of the meetings and things like that, that's why it allowed me to go to a lot of those SEC meetings. I know you used to come with Coach Dickey, Damon used to come with Coach Dooley, And I remember Jay Jacobs used to come with their AD.
David Housen,
yeah,
right.
and Radakovich used to come with the old baseball coach at LSU. So I always call that, we kind of like sit at the kiddie table while the big dogs are there. But that's what allowed me to really, really grow. And I tell people all the time, especially everybody doesn't have to become an athletic director. So I think that's good advice. But the best job I feel like I really ever had until I got to Northwestern was the job I had at Arkansas. Just rising through the ranks, started out in compliance, as you mentioned, and then got a chance to experience some of the things on the external side of the house. Got to manage football and basketball for Coach. And then went off and got my first AD job, and he was very, very influential in me helping me getting that too.
So you mentioned your first AD job. That was at Eastern Michigan.
That's right.
So it's interesting to me that Gene Smith was an athletic director at Eastern Michigan. Derrick Gragg was an athletic director at Eastern Michigan. Heather Lyke was an athletic director at Eastern Michigan. Scott Weatherby, by all measures, will move to a Power 5 opportunity at some point in his career. There's no doubt about that. It's about the people, but I would say there's also got to be a little something about the place. So how was Eastern Michigan a launch point for those number of ADs, in your opinion, from having lived it?
Right. It goes back to, I used to tell people all this all the time. When I was at Eastern Michigan and I would speak to a group like the NAD group, I'd say, hey, and it all went back into paying your dues and paying attention to the trends at those schools. And you're right, it started with Gene. And I used to always say, but before you get to become a Gene Smith, you have to become me. There's a stair-step process to it. And so not only Eastern Michigan, but the Mid-American Conference. Right. And, they had the cradle of coaches at Miami of Ohio. And you look around that league, and a lot of us, Kirby Hocutt was in the MAC when I was there, Ward Manuel, Jim Phillips was the chair of our AD group. Jeff Comfort was in the MAC with us, just a lot of different guys. And we all came up through the ranks. And so I think it was a great training ground for us. You learn a lot of things, you get involved with a lot of things because you don't have huge staffs, so you learn everything at those places. And then I think that translates when it's time to move up the ladder, so to speak.
Let's jump ahead a little bit. So after Eastern Michigan, you went to Tulsa. Great city, a program, while it's a small institution, I think maybe the smallest institution in 1A football, FBS football, but private institution, a lot of good things happening there. And I know that you were comfortable there, but also at some point willing to take the next step when the right opportunity presented itself. Were you a little bit surprised that first opportunity, or that opportunity that presented itself, was actually outside of the AD chair into the NCAA office?
I really was, and it's interesting because at that time I was looking at maybe some transition because I had been there 7 years. And, sometimes they say you can stay at a place too long, and I felt like it was time to change. But I was looking at a lot of other athletic director jobs and interviewed, was a finalist for 3 Power 5 jobs at the time and didn't get any of those. So I felt maybe it was time to do something different. And so got an opportunity. I thank Mark Emmert all the time. He really gave me an extraordinary experience. And to go there as the Senior Vice President for Inclusion, Education, which is leadership development, and community engagement, it's almost like all the transferable skills we learned as athletic directors, it just fed right into that. And one of the things I was going to do post-COVID was I was actually going to be spending a lot of time on campuses, interacting with student athletes in particular, coaches, ADs, and then all the way up to presidents and maybe trustees, depending on what the topics were. So it's an area, all 3 of those areas are very passionate about it. But, right now, we're in probably the most significant social justice movement of our time. And when George Floyd was killed, the student athletes, by and large, as a collective across the country, they were angry. But one thing they did was they discovered or rediscovered the voice that they have. And so it's a voice that we as student athletes 30 years ago, we simply did not have that. We didn't have SAC groups and advisory boards and all the things that they sit on from a conference to national level and even at the institution. So I felt like that was a great chance for me to get into the middle of everything that was going on from a higher standpoint and help guide some of the student athletes and redirect some of that anger. And the demands that they were making, we used to always try to spin it and say, once you make demands of people, you usually get a lot of obstacles and roadblocks thrown at you. So let's talk more about the voice, your voice, and some of the things that you feel very, very, determined about and very strongly about, and start talking about it that way. And some of the things were voter registration on a widespread basis, more financial literacy, more people of color in the athletic departments and on campuses, more ethnic culture study, things like that. Another one that was important to a lot of student athletes was, and we talked a lot about this, you've seen a lot about it, was reviewing the names of historical figures on campus.
Right.
And we did that when I was at Tulsa. They ended up removing the board, removed the name from the law school because of some of the past historical things that the founder of the law school had been involved in.
Right.
And so, and then one of the last things they wanted was a seat at the table. They want their voice to be heard. And so I always continue to encourage people, let's continue to lean in with our student athletes. But getting back to Northwestern, people ask me, well, why you felt so great about that job? Why'd you go back? And at the end of the day, my wife and I discussed it. And, she said, I've been watching you for 25 years do this, and I really think that you belong on campus. And so Northwestern, I went there why everybody else goes there. It's Northwestern. And it combines big-time athletics and, of course, high academics. It's the 9th ranked school in the country. And we love to win. We're very competitive. We're champions across the board, but we don't have to win at all costs. And so I'm an old compliance guy, as you know.
Right.
And I was compliance guy at 3 Power 5 institutions. And so I'm very comfortable with Northwestern, and I feel like its philosophies and core values really match with mine.
It's perfect. I want to come back to Northwestern, but I've got one more question on the NCAA role, if I could, for just a minute.
Absolutely.
I was getting ready to ask you the progress that's been made in the NCAA related to diversity, inclusion, and all those kind of things, particularly in light of the social justice issues you've alluded to, the 50th anniversary of Title IX. I can walk the halls here at NACTA and see a difference in the way we look versus when you and I first started in this business. So it's a work in progress, right? But then you mentioned all the things that you mentioned. And what I would say to you, and I think it's a challenge to all of us to think about, there's a lot happening in terms of how do we tell this story, how do we have a more broad look, a more diversified look than maybe the public really knows. So is that a communications issue then, you think? Or because some things are happening, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the challenges, I said this earlier when I was speaking to a group, is that I think we as a whole, so you don't just say the NCAA, because we're all the NCAA, I don't think we've done a great job of messaging.
Right.
Messaging a lot of the things that I just said, messaging the importance of education and how many lives intercollegiate athletics has affected. And I always say this, when I went to Vanderbilt University, I had 3 things. I had a football scholarship, I had a Pell Grant, and I had a car that my mom found literally a week before I left. And I always say I went to car heaven my junior year. I left it at a gas station. I won't say the name because of sponsors. But I left it at a gas station, and I look back on that and I chuckle. But the 4th thing it led to was an opportunity. And so I don't think we do a great job of putting people out there that say, hey, I was a student athlete. This is what it did for me. This is what it can do for young people. All those things. And there's so many messages. And just being able to leave a Vanderbilt University, which is still very expensive, debt-free, and getting a head start without having to worry about, how much money I owed the university or owed the federal government. All those things that we learned at a school like that, in many schools across the country, I just think we don't do enough of putting out there the benefits of what we're doing. We always hear the negative things. Oh, you're exploiting the kids or things like that, but we never hear a lot about all the good things that come out of it.
It's great stuff. And you're at an institution now that's really having an impact on young people's lives,
Absolutely.
right? So let's switch to that for just a second. Northwestern has had this mantra athletically for some time now as Chicago's Big Ten team, right?
That's right.
How does that play out in your world? And I know obviously you've got alumni bases of all of your competitors in the city, but you are there. You're on the lake.
Right.
Great institution. How do you find your place in Chicago?
That's right. That's one of the things, we beat the drum on that. And one of the things about Northwestern, and at Tulsa it was even more extreme, when you have a smaller student body, by and large you have a smaller alumni base. So a lot of times you'll hear in Chicago, most of the Big Ten schools have a larger alumni base in Chicago than we do. So I think especially past administration did a great job of coming up with that slogan. And now what we're doing is we're doubling down on it. Yeah. And some of the things that we're going to do in the future, we want to keep coming back to that because by and large we're the only school that's located. We're only 12 miles away from Chicago. I can see the Chicago skyline from my office very clearly on a clear day and it's nice out. But it's just one of those things that we've really embraced, and I think really have taken it to another level, so we're going to continue with that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've seen, there's really been an investment in facilities at Northwestern. The Walters Athletics Complex, Welsh Ryan Arena, a lot of other things. There's a big one coming, though, perhaps the biggest facility work in quite some time, and that's you've recently received a gift from the Ryan family, a very generous, very, very generous gift.
Absolutely.
And going to be pouring into the construction of a new stadium. It's very rare that an institution in 2022 literally gets to contemplate what a brand new stadium might look like. It's some sort of tertiary renovation work or that kind of thing. So as y'all have taken a step back and said, what do we envision this being for Northwestern football and the future of Northwestern football for what, 40, 50, 60 years down the road? How have you looked at that? And what's on the docket? How are you trying to make sure that you've got a facility that is now modern and ready to serve the institution for the next 40 or 50 years?
That's a great question. And you've done a lot of facilities. Football stadium is very time consuming. And so you mentioned the other facilities, including Ryan Fieldhouse, which is everybody comes to see the facilities at Northwestern when they're in the area. Ryan Fieldhouse is just a staple and just a landmark for anybody who's doing an indoor football or multi-sport facility. They should really take a look at that. And again, you mentioned the Ryan family, very grateful to them. And they are a historic family with the university and care a lot about the athletics department, but also care a lot about academics and all the other things that go into the institution. And so what we want to do with this stadium, this opportunity is to move our current stadium to world-class level like our other facilities. That's really what we're looking at. So it will have all the modern day amenities that the stadium doesn't have right now that most people are accustomed to. Especially one of the things about us too is we're in a pro sports town. So when you're talking about the Cubs and the White Sox and the Blackhawks and the Bulls, you have to have amenities that all of these fans and these people are accustomed to when they come to your venue, so you can be competitive and stay alive along those levels. So everything from greater ADA access, the concourses, the concession stands, the prime areas, and we don't have a lot of those premium areas right now.
Right.
We only have one, so we'll have a lot more of those types of things as well. Club seating, loge boxes, all the things that you see in a modern day stadium right now. But we've also learned, and I think anybody doing stadiums now, you don't build 100,000 seat stadium, and so we're looking at capacity, what we're going to do with that, and maximizing our revenue and matching that to whatever the capacity is with the premium seating to be able to level some things out. And we still have some hoops to jump through and some things because our stadium's also located in the city, and it's about a mile away from campus, along with our basketball arena. You mentioned Welsh Ryan Arena, Rocky and Bernice Miller Park, the baseball field, the softball stadium. So that's really in Evanston. And so just the things that you have to do with the city to get clearances. And so we've been doing a lot of work. And then the biggest thing is in one of the upcoming board meetings in the fall, that's when we will take it back to them after this full year of work has been done to get hopefully an approval to move forward.
All right, 2 more questions. One's athletic related, one's just for fun. You've been around athletics now for 30 years. You've held positions with the NCAA and, as we've mentioned, several Power 5 institutions. You're looked at as a leader in this industry. And if I said, how do you view your obligation as a leader in the industry to help establish what the future looks like, given, turmoil is probably too strong of a word, Derrick, but the turmoil that we're in right now, what's your role in that as somebody who's been around?
Right, that's a great question because having been involved in it, I've been involved as a student athlete and an administrator now in what I call like the evolution of college athletics. And in just the last 2 years, you add on, in addition to COVID, obviously, and the great resignation era and people trying to decide, is this really what they want to do going forward? And we had the Supreme Court case with Austin, the transfer portal with the one-time transfer exception, and then NIL. So really, this enterprise, I won't say it looks totally different than it did 2 years ago, but it's major change. And so what I told, I think it was one of the boards I've spoken to a couple of years ago, I said, at this point, I think everybody who's really serious about college athletics, it's time to double down. and make sure that everyone understands the commitment, the investment, and all those things. And that's what I love about Northwestern too, because I think they were on the front end of a lot of those things. So the commitment and the investment is already there. And now I think it's more recommitment. And then getting back to the student athletes who have gone through a lot. We all have. And so we always are the first thing with student athletes is to make sure that they are doing well, their health and well-being, mentally in particular, physically, obviously, and their academics. But right now is a time of grace, and trying to understand each other a little bit more. And it's been tough because we haven't been able to communicate the way that we want to. We haven't been in person a lot. And so that takes away a lot of it. So it's almost a re-education. We're coming on with huge policies that are different. The transformation committee is in effect right now with the NCAA, so things are going to change. But we all have to adapt and adjust very quickly and continue that if we're going to carry on this great enterprise of college athletics.
Communication is the key, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, at the risk of putting you on the spot related to a sponsor, so if you decide not to answer it, I understand. You've been in Chicago now, what, almost 2 years, a year and a half?
Just a year.
Year. Man, okay,
Yeah.
just a year. COVID time, right?
That's right.
Favorite deep dish pizza?
Oh my goodness. No, you're gonna get me in trouble with that. But there's some good ones.
Yeah.
And I like 2 or 3 of them, but I'm not gonna.
You give it to me offline.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay.
I'll do that.
It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
This has been awesome,
Thanks for coming on with me.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, folks. You've been listening to From the Chair with Mike Hamilton. Today's great guest, Dr. Derrick Gragg from Northwestern University. Listen to us each Wednesday morning on all the audio platforms that you listen to your podcasts on, and also watch it on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.